why housing is so unaffordable, and it's about to get worse. 36 in.
There you go. It's November 9th, 2023. Exciting things happening for the Fed, for the government. Not really, actually. Just everything's really expensive. The first thing we want to jump into follows up on last week's topic. Of interest rates and the true cost. And there was this article that CNBC published. Zillow says if you buy now, it can take 13.5 years to make a profit on your home sale. Now, I read into the article and it's referring again to the cost of interest over time and just, you know, how expensive it is. But can you clarify what this means and what people should take away from it? It's kind of like what buyers, sellers, and investors should know.
What's Zillow's business model?
To get listings on there?
To sell leads.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what Zillow needs is traffic in order to sell leads. So what do? They put out this article. It's massive clickbait. And my first initial response when I look at this article is I was like, that is BS. Like, these stats are wrong. And, you know, so it's my gut reaction too, and it's kind of visceral. I was like, come on, Zillow, you want to fight with me? So what they basically did here is they took some stats and said, okay, based on all these metros, if we take our Zestimate or our Zillow Home Value Index, use that for the first year, and then we take the long-term historical average for the life of the loan, how long would it take to pay it off? So first off, we have to just immediately take this with a grain of salt. One, we know Zillow's estimates are always way off all over the board, especially if we're not talking about cookie cutter real estate. Cookie cutter real estate for a Zestimate, it can nail it. If you're like in Phoenix, Arizona, in a subdivision, there's 1,000 homes, there's 50 of that one, you're going to get really close. Anytime properties start to get unique, any of these valuation models, not just Zillow, get off. Second, let's remember how much money Zillow lost trying to predict something last time. Zillow lost $1.4 billion
Crazy.
Trying to flip homes. They were using their valuation models, they were buying properties, and they lost that $1.42 billion in the hottest real estate market ever, when any idiot could literally buy a home and put some paint on it, put some carpet on it, put some landscaping on it, and the market was going up so fast they made money, and Zillow lost over $1 billion, well, almost $1.5 billion in 3 years. So there's my instant reaction to this. When we dig into their logic of using the Zestimate or their home value index, and then taking the long-term historical average, because we've talked about a lot of housing data. Has housing data over the last 20 years, has it appreciated more or less than in the past?
More.
Absolutely. So what they did is they said, oh, we'll take all housing data so I can shove those appreciation numbers down, because data is how you slice it. Statistics. There are lies. There are damn lies. And then there are statistics. And it will depend on how you carve this up. So they just carved it up in a way that would demonstrate what they wanted. But there is some still interesting takeaways. The interesting takeaways is what areas they said would take the longest, which is the most affordable areas. Parts of Arkansas, parts of Texas, parts of Kansas. In other words, markets that have mild appreciation that stay flat. You know what? That makes logical sense. Which ones would take the shortest? The ones on the coast. And specifically, they went through and they were saying San Jose, California, and in their top 5 is all California. And if you look at San Jose has appreciated very rapidly over a long period of time. It's also a tech area. There's also a lot of money there. I wanted to dig into just get right to the meat and potatoes, because Zillow is basically lying to you when they say it's going to take 13 and a half years. And so the numbers for Seattle was going to be 10.7 months or 10 years and 7 months for it to return. I was like, wait a second, come on. So here's the actual numbers of what Seattle has done over the last 10 years. October of 2013, the median sales price in Seattle was $419,525. By October of 2023, it was $800,000. Basically, it doubled. If you look at the average price went from $481,323 to $934,054. Once again, a doubling. So if I take the long-term historical average, it was lower. But if I look at it more real and more recent, you're going to see above average appreciation. So this was just more FUD. This is more fear mongering. This is clickbait in order to generate traffic so they can sell leads.
Yeah, the thing I think about is we can barely predict what's going to happen 13 months out. How are you supposed to predict what's going to happen 13 years out? We also know that, as you mentioned, different markets will have different circumstances, different numbers. And again, in 13 years, who knows? Cities are going to completely evolve and change. There could be Detroit stories where people have a mass exodus, and then there'll be, what if tons of people just move to Arkansas, And so it could totally change up all these numbers. But I think that's a good thing for everyone to have awareness of. Anything on the internet, the whole point is to get your attention.
Bingo.
Headlines, the article itself. You can skew the numbers, even creators, and my profession is content creating, working with creators. We're trying to get your attention and keep it. And there's a lot of people out there, including writers of articles, as well as producers of video, that can literally just do whatever they want to create whatever narrative, whatever kind of takeaway. And so that's why it's great to hear you kind of break it all down, and then especially isolate it to the Seattle market. But I think the big thing is, what's the takeaway for the buyer, right? The buyer in Seattle, and what should you really care about rather than fearing what Zillow has to say on a random tweet.
For the buyer in Seattle or the investor in Seattle, your takeaway from this is, Zillow, the doomer on YouTuber, the market's going to crash and it's going to take you 4,000 years. They're not trying to help your family. They're trying to sell leads, create traffic, do things for their business. So you always have to look at someone's underlying motivation, number one. Number two, it is a good time to buy. It is a good time to invest. I was called earlier today by one of our investors. He said, hey, I have a large cash value inside of my life insurance that I think I'm thinking about putting to work right now. And I asked him what he could get the money at. He said 5.5%. And I said, well, what are your plans by the end of the year? Are there any tax things we need to do? What do we need to do to move some money around? And he said, I'm looking at this large commercial space. It's multiple commercial spaces. And I think I'm going to go buy it. And I'm going to use my life insurance as the mortgage for it because it'll be cheaper debt. So it's almost like I'm buying it at a discount relative to everyone else. And then when rates come down in the next couple of years, I'll just refinance it. I think my brain exploded and a little goo came out the side because I was like, that's so brilliant. When debt is really high, this particular buyer and investor was looking at a unique way to leverage existing assets in order to be able to purchase assets today at a discount, because he shows up then like a cash buyer, even though he has debt and the debt's at like 5.5, but that 5.5 destroys what everyone else is getting in the commercial market. So he's essentially getting a higher performing asset than anyone else at this time. So that's the key, is that when this fear, uncertainty, and doubt, we're going to talk more about FUD, is happening, is that is going to create some type of opportunity for you as a buyer or for an investor in a market like this. And especially during the end of the year, winter season, there's always deals during winter.
For sure. Just follow up what you just said. In a appreciating market where it's strong buyers, cheap money, it's also easy to get financing, so you don't think creatively. People aren't thinking, oh, let me go to, in this case, his retirement
life insurance
policy, which I've never actually heard of that. So in this market where it's a little bit more difficult and where financing is expensive on the bank side, on the mortgage side, will there be more of these opportunities? And what are other sources of lending that people used to do regularly, but now it's just finally coming back because the mortgage industry made it so easy for buyers?
Yeah, so I want our audience to think about this in a larger context. And this is why you subscribe and comment and hang out with us, because this is the key. The Fed essentially took interest rates to zero. And when interest rates were zero and inflation was 2, there's a positive spread there. And what that did was that artificially lifted the market by creating excess liquidity, aka money in the system, and easy money. So what that did was that ballooned asset values. Now that the Fed has started restricting it, and we'll get more into this later on in this specific podcast, but now that they're restricting it, what's happening is the tide is going out. And as the tide goes out, there's less water available, less liquidity in the system. Then creative financing pops up. The creative financing things that we're seeing right now is you're seeing owner financed deals. Went and looked at a 16-plex up there in Cedar Woolley, 6 different parcels. They were willing to owner finance it at 25% down on a 5-year call on a 30-year note at 5.5%. When the market's at like 7, that's a good deal. So owner financing in a second position. So maybe you could get the bank at 50% and you could get the seller on the next 25. Another thing that we're starting to see come back is subject twos. Subject two is where you go in and you wrap someone's existing mortgage. Okay. Another thing we're seeing more of, we're seeing more lease options. We're seeing more options to purchase. We're getting all the way back into this creative financing. The funding, it's coming from banks. It's coming from local community banks. It's coming from people's self-directed IRAs. It's coming from the cash value of their life insurance. It's coming from a home equity line of credit against their house or against an investment property. It's coming from personal lines of credit. You're just seeing this creativity come back into the market, and it's not coming from all one source. So you and I had talked about a deal that I was looking at. I was running around trying to figure out the funding. The funding for that particular deal came from 4 different sources, not one like usual, 4 different notes, a first note, a second note, a third note, and a fourth note in basically $75,000 to almost $200,000 increments. I haven't done something with 4 mortgages on it, 4 different private money lenders on it ever. Welcome to 2023 and 2024. We're going to be getting creative like this. This is why I tell people the deals are out there. One of the individuals said, wait a second, you're going to pay me like 2 points and 8%. So I'm going to make like 10% on my money? And they're like, yeah. They're like, well, it just sits in my bank account anyway, and I'm making 0.4, not even a 0.5%, 0.4, and it's sitting in a savings account. And they're like, I'd gladly lend it out and do a deal right now. You're just going to see more of that. Is this kind of, by any means possible, just plugging the deal together.
Yeah, the lack of knowledge is your opportunity. And in this market where it's not as easy for a buyer, if you know what you're doing, if you're an agent that has all these deals and also all these relationships, you can connect the dots, which leads us right into the next topic, why FUD in housing and the economy creates massive opportunities. We're kind of talking about that right now.
What is FUD? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. How is FUD created? It's created by these Zillow headlines. It's created by the National Association of Realtors loses lawsuit for $1.8 billion, and commissions are dead forever, and real estate's going down like the Titanic because it just hit an iceberg, blah, blah, blah. And it's created by, there's multiple wars and conflicts going on, by high energy prices, by inflation, and the news is just pounding on us consistently right now. So Warren Buffett says to us, he says to his investors, he said, you should be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. It's greedy time because that uncertainty and doubt is so high. So what they do is they read the headlines. And you've taught me this on the creator side. The algorithm. Well, it just keeps feeding you, and you keep going around in the same loop, and you're going like literally down the drain of being fed the same thing over and over again and not seeing multiple perspectives. So if you're looking for fear and you find the fear, then YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever it is, Google, even the search engine, is just going to keep feeding that to you because that is the result that kept you on the platform for the longest period of time so they could sell you the most ads. Well, is that true? It's not necessarily true of what's happening. That's their truth, not the truth. And there's a big difference. And so you need to dig in your local market and figure out the truth of your local market. Know the numbers and find an agent who can explain them to you. We can in our metro. I can't everywhere else, but we can find someone who can hold your hand and say, this is a deal or this is not a deal. And that's what's creating the opportunity. Real estate's this constant teeter-totter. As something pulls it down on one side, this gap underneath over here is creating massive opportunity. So the high interest rates, the slowing down of the economy is creating this gap. And it's creating gap on the creative side, on the investor side, definitely on the new construction land development side. Mark my words, buyers, there are going to be no homes in 2025 and 2026 because we are not permitting enough today because permitting have already slowed down. What's that mean for us as investors? Home prices and home values go up. Rental prices and rental rates go up. So, someone asked me this week, he said, the news, it's causing me stress because they're thinking about buying a home. It's making it so I can't sleep. And I said, if that's happening to you, do you think that's happening to other buyers? Yes, I do. Then that's the right time because if they're afraid, there's less of them.
What does Warren Buffett say?
Be greedy when others are fearful.
Yeah. When there's blood in the streets, that's when you want to be there, right? Because everyone is running away. They're not paying attention. And there's going to be those deals that pop up, discounts to be had, and it's those people willing to hustle. Versus when the market was great, interest rates are so low, and everybody and their mom is in there, right? Trying to get a deal for themselves. So it's very competitive.
Yes.
When it's least competitive. Okay, let's actually talk about something that doesn't have to do with real estate, but it's very relevant. Cryptocurrencies. I dabble in it, I've got a little bit, but the reason I bring it up is that is even more volatile. Bitcoin is the biggest cryptocurrency. If you're not familiar, that's a digital currency that was made up way back in 2010 or maybe a little bit before. People bought it at 1 cent, and at the height, it was worth, one Bitcoin was worth $69,000.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, it was kind of crazy. Well, it went from 69,000 all the way to, I believe, 16,000. And that was a lot of fear.
Yes.
That was that fear, uncertainty, doubt. And then because there wasn't a lot of faith in it, people just started selling. And they didn't care. They're like, hey, I'd rather lose 10% of my money than 50%. So they were just selling and selling and selling and selling. Went rock bottom.
And isn't Bitcoin back over like 24 now? Or?
And,
36 right now.
It's
and that's
36.
my point. Just a year ago, when it was at 16,000, people thought it was going to go to zero.
Yep.
Now it is up above $35,000 per Bitcoin. There is definitely circumstances that maybe made you a little bit more hesitant, but it was the fear that drove it down so fast.
Bingo.
And what's scary is it might not be that volatile because that you're talking that was like a 70% drop in value. You'd have to have nuclear bombs going off for real estate to do something like that, right? Yeah. God willing, nothing ever happens like that. But the point I'm trying to make is even in the last recession, 2008, max it went down 50%, right? But that was over a course of some period of time. But it's on assets that are worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So this next 2 years from somebody that's been through a couple of these seasons, obviously it, you're going to see the same thing kind of happen. It might play out on a longer time horizon, but when there's all these headlines that just say things are going to crash, so much fearful. Oh, this is the other thing too, as a creator too, somebody that's been in the game, we're more so reading the headlines than in 2008. More people are creating that fearful content in 2023. So it's even more exaggerated.
Yep.
So the data and what's really going on isn't really surfacing. There's people like Anton Stentner that's trying to give you the real data in the Seattle area in the real estate market. But most other people, as you mentioned, I know this, they're creators. They're trying to put out content that makes them money, right? Product placements, sponsorships, ad revenue. So though I do believe there's channels out there trying to give the right information, they're playing a little bit of that clickbaity, the FUD. And the point I'm trying to make is that's actually in your benefit as a buyer or investor. You want to lean into that because, I mean, this is one thing maybe before we get into the next topic, talk about, again, summarize why the data tells you that house prices probably aren't going to go down and why they're going to, if anything, go up.
Yeah. I want to think about this for a second. How is Bitcoin and real estate the same? Bitcoin and real estate both have a limited supply. There's only one earth. There's only so many Bitcoins. So their supply is restricted. Do both of them have a high level of demand? Yes, there's a lot of demand for money. And of course, there's a lot of demand for housing. It's one of the basic human needs. Do both of the values go up and down? Yes. But what have the values of both Bitcoin and real estate done over time? Consistently, they go up. Even with the upswings and the downswings, over the long run, it goes up. That's why it's really funny every time you see this in the comments. Well, I bought my first house and it was 99% interest for $10,000.
In 1982.
In 1982. And that means nothing to the average person today. It also means nothing to the average person when Bitcoin was a penny. When our friend Guy said he tipped the pizza delivery guy 2 Bitcoins when he showed up at the house. Mistakes of the 2000s. But the idea is kind of simple. Whenever you have a product, a commodity, a thing that is in demand, that people want, that has a restricted supply, prices have to go up, especially when it's regulated or watched at or has a market in which it can trade. That's what I see here. And so you look at this fear and this uncertainty and doubt, and you just say, why? Is housing getting easier to build in the United States or harder?
Harder.
Is regulations going up?
Yes.
Is the cost of labor going up?
Yes.
Is there massive demand because this is the best country on earth and everyone wants to be here?
Well, tens of thousands of people are proving that.
Yes,
coming
thousands.
over the border.
They're spilling through the border. They're just walking right through. So we know then prices have to go up. But Anton, what if they go down? It doesn't matter. They're just going to go right back up. So this little pause in the market, and we know in the Seattle metro, we might go down 1% or 2% this winter, and then it's just going to go right back up again. And there's going to be other parts of the United States that are going to get hit worse. I still wouldn't be worried about it because overall, over the long run, if you intend to own real estate longer than 2 years, it's go time. It's time to buy.
Next thing we want to talk about is a K-shaped recovery, the disparity in housing between the ultra-rich and the everyday Americans. What do people need to know about what a K-shaped recovery is and why it's important to them?
A K-shaped recovery is kind of simple. So what happens is the economy starts to recover different. It's not even. There's a portion of the economy that, just like a K, gets a nice up, and there's a portion of the economy that gets a down. So what we're seeing happening, and what I believe is going to happen, is the ultra rich, the high net worth individuals are going to outperform the middle class, the poor, the everyday American. And their asset values are essentially going to balloon during this time, while everyone else's asset values, unfortunately, or lack of asset values, don't. And you're seeing this already. You're seeing the tech market recover, and you're seeing small business get its ass kicked. And you're seeing big cap companies who can borrow at cheap money start to recover and perform better, and small business who can't borrow cheaply get their butt kicked. So I wanted to just give a real simple example of this. The hedge fund tycoon, his name is Ken Griffin, is planning to build the world's most expensive mega mansion. It's going to cost him over $1 billion for this 50,000 square foot mega mansion that's there in Palm Beach, Florida on Billionaires Row. It's right down the road from Donald Trump, Mar-a-Lago. It's in that area. He bought all these houses. He's dozering them. He's building $1 billion house, the first $1 billion house, 20 acres. But wait, the average American, with mortgage rates being 8%, has the least unaffordable home since 1984. Basically, right now, it's taking the average American 41% of their income to be able to afford the median price. That doesn't even work in the Seattle metro or the coast. The median income in our area won't even support it. This also assumes no debt. So if you have debt and an average income and not a bunch of savings, you're not getting it done. While this hedge fund manager is literally building $1 billion home. If he feels comfortable spending $1 billion today on a home, do you think he's worried that he's at the bottom of the K?
No.
Absolutely not. He feels super comfortable. That's why he can spend. So what's happening is people who have these assets, even as the stock market comes down, or like we were just talking about, Bitcoin comes down, as it comes back up, they get a natural lift. When you go and buy real estate and your real estate assets naturally lift, you get your asset values increase. But if you don't have them, everything just gets more expensive. And the problem with this whole inflation idea and this K-shaped recovery is really simple. Prices are not coming back down. No one's coming to save you. Inflation caused everything to get more expensive, but it's not going to return to normal. So for the average everyday American who is possibly living paycheck to paycheck or had a little bit of excess savings, that excess savings is now going to insurance, groceries, gas, and housing. These basic human needs are taking a lot away from them. That creates civil unrest. So one of the things to also think about here is we know the Federal Reserve, we talk about the Federal Reserve a lot. We know the Federal Reserve wants to keep rates higher for longer. How much can they beat up the average American before it creates so much civil unrest that it creates problems for the economy? How far can they take jobs away and push interest rates, push wages down before the average American has a problem? People already feel like the system's rigged. It's going to feel more rigged after this because this gap is just going to continue to widen. What does that mean for our buyers? What does it mean for our investors? What does it mean for our home sellers? It means that in this high inflation environment, you need to stack up on assets. Ooh, what's our asset of choice? Real estate. Because as the values rise in real estate and as inflation stays high, that real estate prices are going to rise along with it. It's a good hedge against the inflation. And if you don't have these assets, you need to go find Dear Aunt Tilly. Dear Aunt Tilly is a friend, a family member, or an actual relative who has some cash or liquidity, who would invest with you in order to get a deal or possibly help you buy that first home. Or maybe you need to actually buy the first home with Dear Aunt Tilly and she moves in with you. We talked a little bit earlier about getting creative. Getting creative in today's market is maybe two families buying a home together, two sisters buying a home together, you buying the home with Dear Aunt Tilly, whoever that is in your life, two good friends buying a home together and renting out the rooms. We sold it was a 5-bedroom split level to two young men, late 20s, and they were buying it together. And I said, and what are you guys going to do? They said, we're going to rent out the other 3 rooms. Brilliant. We get it. Some of this is really expensive, but there are things you can do. Don't lose hope. There's opportunity in this K-shaped recovery.
I think the K-shape visual is really important for people to see because you have to decide which roller coaster you want to be on. The one that's going to go down and potentially never come up for you.
Yes.
Or it's going to be so hard to come up. Or do you want to be on the one that's going to go up? And
Yeah.
It is happening. It's probably been happening for about 20 years.
Yes.
And you can actually attribute a lot of it to the tech space, because with innovation and technology, the people closest to that move faster. They grow bigger. You see it because of what the first few trillion-dollar companies are all tech companies.
Yep.
Apple, Microsoft, maybe Amazon. I don't know if they're there, but they're in the ballpark. They're all, and no matter if Amazon is about selling products, they really are a technology company. They're in Seattle here. And the reason I bring this up for anybody that's listening, that's either a buyer, seller, but especially the real estate agents and investors, you can't just sit on your butt and wait for something to change. Yes. Because the people that have the control, the people that have all the money, the people that have all the resources and the knowledge on top of the technology. So like, for example, hedge funds and big stock brokerages, I don't know if that's the right term, but they have computers that automatically trade for them based off of, like automatic settings. The human can't compete there. That's why it's almost impossible, not just because it's impossible to do what Warren Buffett says he doesn't even try to do, but it's because you're competing against bigger resources, more technology. It's not about making more money or becoming rich. It's about just surviving and the necessity of fending for yourself right now. I think that there's a lot of changes that need to be made in the government and policies, banking, the Federal Reserve. But guess what? If it doesn't change, you're the only person that can change it. So you've got to know more. You've got to dig in. You've got to hustle. You've got to work harder. And you have to have a mindset of, I'm going to get better. My bank account's going to be bigger, just so that I can stay at a level playing field, because there's so many people just sleeping right now.
If you're in the middle of the K and even the bottom of the part that's starting to go up, it's going to naturally try to pull you down. So like you were just saying, I think you're going to have to swim harder against the current. You're going to have to work smarter. You're going to have to figure out how to get the raise, how to get your debt down, how to get your savings up, and how to create more opportunity. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to pull and pull and pull on you. And this is crazy. So I was talking with another friend, and they're like, how much do you think you need to retire? Because this idea of $1 million used to be so like, I want to be a millionaire. Like we've talked about before, that I want to be a millionaire is a 10 millionaire. It's 8 digits today. But I think you also have to get to a minimum of 5. So this idea of retiring with $1 million won't work. Retire $1 million, 5% a year, 50 grand. You need $5 million, 5% a year, 250 grand. After taxes, you're left with 175, 150,000. And let's just say that's what you're going to live on in your retirement. That's going to be a comfortable retirement, but that's how high the cost of living is, especially in metros like where we're at. It's one of the reasons you're seeing that exodus too. And people go, man, I got to move to Texas. I'm moving to Tennessee. Moving to Arkansas. And what they do is they sell that expensive home here in the Seattle metro, and then they just go there and pay cash for something. And then they get a quality of living that's pretty awesome, but the cost of living is so much less. So that dollar seems to stretch further. So you either have to figure out how to make my dollar stretch further in retirement, or you got to figure out how do I get 5, 10, 20 million there, just ready for that retirement? Because as sad as that is, I think that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, it's scary. So let's talk about what's a meltup. Tell us what the heck a meltup is, and what does that mean for real estate and other assets?
We need to really be aware of this possibility, because you've been seeing it in the stock market throughout most of this year. A meltup is when an asset class defies the logic of the economy or that asset class. So a meltup until recently in the stock market was a stock market was still just going up, even though the economy was clearly trending down. The real estate market in some places going up, even though clearly the market's trending down. And I want to create this visual, right? The Federal Reserve, in order to stop inflation, the pot was boiling, and they came over and they stuck a lid on it. But the water's still in the pot, and the water is still boiling. So the lid's kind of, rattling around the top. Ting, 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 ting. You all know what I'm talking about. Because I think we need to be really aware that we just put a lid on a boiling pot. And I've got some numbers to prove this. From 2008 to 2014, the Federal Reserve expanded their balance sheet through money printing, through quantitative easing, by $3.5 trillion in the last recession. About 800 million was for TARP, the Toxic Asset Relief Program, and that's where they went and purchased the bad debt from the banks in order to bail out the banks. The rest was them buying bonds and then stimulus through infrastructure. But it was still 3.5 trillion. That caused a 10-year bull run, one of the biggest bull runs ever. And the only people who lost money was Zillow flipping homes at 1.4 billion. Okay? Everyone else made a shit ton of money, and asset values shot through the roof. And then the Fed goes, "Oh my goodness. COVID, this is really bad. Really bad. We got to turn on the money printers. They got to go and just crank away." So let's talk about what they did in COVID. So in 2020, they put out $5.2 trillion for COVID relief, which increased our money supply by 27%. On top of $4.5 trillion for quantitative easing, aka purchasing of treasuries. Another $2 trillion in planned infrastructure spending. So they have $13 trillion in new money, which is a 35% increase. This blows my mind. In money circulation, which is 60% of our GDP. This was more than the money printers. This was like an aircraft carrier of money printers just blowing it all over the ocean. But let's go back. If 3.5 trillion caused a 10-year bull run and we just printed 13, and the Fed said, just kidding, we're going to put a lid on it. But that pot's still boiling. It's just rattling around. They're going to have to pull the lid off eventually. So right now, what it is there is something that's called real interest rates. And real interest rates is what defines whether monetary policy is restrictive or not restrictive, which helps the economy to grow fast in a non-restrictive, aka high liquidity environment where money is cheap, free, and easy, or it's restrictive when money is not cheap, free, and easy, and money costs a lot. So we are currently in a restrictive. Real interest rates is what happens when you adjust for inflation. So the Fed funds rate right now is 5.5%. And the Fed's favorite metric, PCE, is 3.4%. That's how they measure inflation. It's not just CPI. So this is approximate math. We're doing ghetto Arlington math here. That's where I grew up. I love Arlington, but this is just simplifying the math. So you take the 5.3%, you minus the 3.4% for a real rate of 2.1%. That's what causes the economy to contract. This is what causes the money supply to slow down, the liquidity to go out. So when the Fed says, I'm going to stay higher for longer, this is what they mean. They mean they will stay restrictive. But sooner or later, they've got to pull the top off the pot. And the water is still in there boiling. So asset values are going to melt up and naturally lift. So what does this mean for people? Go buy assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, guns, gold, things to make booze. Okay, the last part's a little bit of prepper stuff, but you get the idea.
Bitcoin.
And you're probably going to see a bull run that then lifts it after we go through this fake recession that is forced by the restrictive monetary policy. And when they say higher for longer, they don't have to maintain the Fed funds rate at 5.5. Because if inflation comes down to just 3, they could lower it by almost a 0.5 percentage point, which makes everything cheaper, but they're still restrictive. So higher for longer doesn't mean the Fed has to stay at 5.5, which will then cause real estate, the 30-year debt, to be cheaper too, which causes corporate debt to be cheaper, which causes HELOCs to be cheaper, business lines of credit. Do expect higher for longer, but don't expect it to be this high the whole time. This is why I keep saying we believe it'll start to float down towards the latter part of 2024. And then be prepared for this idea of a melt up in assets, of assets just naturally lifting because of that 13 trillion that was printed. You actually sent me down this rabbit hole. That's the funny thing.
How so?
Well, because of the original Zillow article that we started talking about, my brain was like, what other data are we not paying attention to? Okay. So I start going through this, and the Zillow article led me to, the K-shaped recovery, which led to the people with assets rise. Well, what else is affecting asset values right now? Ooh, real interest rates. Well, what's going to happen with real interest rates? Real interest rates are going to stay higher for a little bit longer. But wait a second, we still printed 13 trillion. If we printed 13 trillion, asset values have to rise. It means prices are never going down again also, and things are going to be more expensive in our future.
That was like a crash course, quick version of Economics 101. It was very detailed. And the reason I think it's important to simplify it is because that's a lot to consider. But I think about this all the time for the average person that doesn't think about economics, doesn't even know what the Fed is, what they do. They don't understand inflation and money printing. What was the percentage of money that was printed in the last 3 years in terms of the overall money supply? Let's just do basic ballpark numbers.
35% increase in the money in circulation.
In the last 3 years.
In the last 3 years.
Okay, 35%. This is really good. So the way I look at it is in 2019, say there was $100 in existence, $101 bills in existence for 10 people. 10 people is a population of America, or just population that uses dollars, okay? Yeah. 10 people. Now, the way it used to work, as another human got put into the equation, so when it goes from 10 to 11, guess what? You naturally print more money because there's more productivity. It makes sense. So you go from 100 to maybe $110, right? And it just goes like that. What they did is rather than the extra person being born, they just fast forwarded and dropped another $35. And the reason it's important, it doesn't seem like a lot. And when you do 100 to 135, right? Big deal, okay? But think about this. And what they did was that $35, they tried to distribute it to the 10 different people. So everybody, let's just say, had different amounts of money, but they all had maybe $1 to $3 extra dollars.
Yep. Each person had an average of $13.50.
Exactly. And what do? They put that extra $1 to $3 inside of their wallet. There's some people that already had maybe $12, $15 versus some people only had $1 or $2. Well, what happens is the people that had less money, that $2 to $3 extra dollars, man, let me go buy something. And then it's gone. This is a scary thing. That money is going to work through those different 10 people, but it's going to end up in just a few people's wallet.
Yes.
It never disappears though. So why inflation is inevitable? This is the danger of money printing and the Fed playing it around with it, and why some people would argue it's better to go back to a gold standard where everything based off of something valuable, which back in the day, every dollar you could trade it in for gold. That was kind of the deal. And then they cut this off. I'm really going through a lot of history in a short amount of time. But just think about these 10 people. There's only going to be 2 or 3 that have almost all $135.
Yep.
And those few people are the ones buying up whole neighborhoods, whole portfolios of real estate. They're the ones that have the ability to not only buy things, but to lend it. We were talking about the people that are using their retirement portfolios or their insurance policies. Yeah. And so less and less, they say the rich get richer, poor get poorer. This is part of the problem, because when you just print money, it circulates through the economy kind of an artificial way, not in a true capitalistic nature. Because the people that just get money given to them, they quickly spend it. Fed, I believe, have good intentions. I don't believe in the whole they're like puppets for the rich people,
the conspiracy.
Right? But human behavior never changes.
Yeah.
That isn't evil. It's just what people do. And so why this is a big deal and why it's more likely that house prices, Bitcoin, all assets would go up, because there's just limited of things. With homes being harder to build, with governments, counties, cities, you and I experience this right now. They're making it even tougher because the permitting process is not getting easier, even though you would think that's logical to do so. And the fear is getting into the minds of investors, of developers, even seasoned ones that are educated, and they're just slowing down. All those factors. So then there's going to be more people. That's the thing. More people are being born. In America's case, in Seattle's case, right? More people are coming into the country.
Yes.
That's more demand.
Yes.
And they stopped the money printer, so they just put a pause. So again, those people that got money from the government and then spent it, they're not going to get that free money anymore.
No.
So then those people with all the money have all the power. There's less supply of houses. This is why house prices are going up. Just think about this for a second. I do believe you could still go down. You could go up. There might be some, but over time, what always happened naturally will artificially be even crazier. You know, and you can actually see this with Bitcoin. There is one big benefit to paying attention to Bitcoin people, because they made economics a cool thing to study. And they're studying supply and demand. They're studying history. And the Bitcoin bulls, the people that believe in it the most, all they're doing is banking on human behavior and history playing out again. This is why people, and I have friends that are Bitcoin bulls. These are people that have 100% confidence that it's going to grow in value. They believe that $15,000 Bitcoin a year ago would eventually be 100,000 and $1 million one day. Well, guess what? In a year, they were actually so correct, because it went up 100% in value. 15,000 to 35,000. That's purely psychology playing out. Guess what? Real estate's going to do that. Cars are going to do that. Maybe not TVs. They always go down in price. That's the bonus. We all got bigger TVs, right? But everything else gets more expensive. And dare I say it, even food is going to get more expensive. So when everything from food to your home gets more expensive, if you're not the person paying attention to this, even as like a novice like myself, just generally, you're going to get left behind. And that's dangerous, because it just like, you know, the person that's dealing with health things, maybe got overweight and just continue to go, it's hard to climb back up to that healthy standard or to be super elite high performance. Same thing when it comes to real estate. You don't want to be behind. Those people that bought a house 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they're already by default way more ahead of anybody that's trying to buy a house today or in the next 10 years, just because of timing. And this is why Anton's saying, if you're thinking about buying a house, really think about buying it as soon as possible, because it could be a lot worse in the next 1, 2, 3 years. And ultimately in 10 years from now, you're going to thank God you bought that home.
Because supply will continue to be constrained. One real simple takeaway I thought of, brilliant example, by the way, $100 available, 10 people. So now the Fed printed money. Now we have $135 for 10 people, aka $13.50 per person. But let's just flip that around. If there's 35% more money, it also means the amount of goods and services didn't magically shoot up. So now everything costs 35% more.
Which we actually saw.
And so, you know, please in the comments, tell us what you saw for your inflation and what you're feeling. They're saying they're getting inflation under control, but we're not seeing that in average prices for the average person. But it's so simple. And so then we just flip that one thing around one more time. That means your dollar's only worth 65% of what it just was. That's the other side of that same coin. It no longer spends like $1, it spends like 65 cents. That's the big takeaway here. So when someone says, I'm working harder, I'm doing more, my dollar's not going as far, it's because it's only worth 65 cents. Now we're using this example and we've kind of muddied up the math, so that's not totally correct. But I'd say to the average person, that's exactly what they feel. They feel that 35% less spending power, and especially groceries, gas, cost of living, rent, mortgages. Thank you for watching today. If you've enjoyed this, watch this video too.